Hi, this is James Governor, co-founder of RedMonk, and we're here for a conversation with RedMonk. Today, I have Gerald Venzl from Oracle, and we're going to be talking about Oracle Database 23C, which is a bit of a mouthful, but when you're Oracle, you've been around for a while, and you get into those version numbers that are quite impressive. Anyway, Gerald, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on the call, James. Hi, I'm Gerald. I'm a senior director here at Oracle in product management for Oracle Database. I've been with Oracle in product management for about of 10 years, a little bit less, and actually a long time Oracle database user as a developer before my life at Oracle. And I'm really excited to talk to you more about Oracle Database 23C.
Great. So good place to start. Developers. RedMonk is all about developers. And I think, so in the press release, we do as industry analysts occasionally provide a quote for a press release. And for your launch, I described 23C free as a radical departure. And here's why I did that. We at RedMonk have a thesis which we call the new kingmakers. And the point there is that the influence of developers on technology decision-making is greater than it ever was. So we've moved from a model which was the historical top-down purchasing-led adoption of technology into one where the engineers were the practitioners, much more influential in those choices. This is driven by some key underpinnings. One would be open source. The other would be the cloud. Another would be sort of the social. If we think about what we learn and how we can go to GitHub, we can find the best developers on the planet building a particular thing, and we can start trying that thing out. So the new kingmaker is this phenomenon. And to me, anytime you're making it less permission required, that's something that ties into this new kingmaker phenomenon. And so with 23C free in particular, the reason I described it as a radical departure when I saw what you'd put together was that this was the first time that the developer database was the superset. And historically, Oracle would have this incredibly functional thing and would say, well, let's have a subset of that for developers. Whereas this really felt like, let's take all of the new bits, all of the new functionality, get it in the hands of developers first, and let them make the market. Let them, it might be, Spring developer needs to understand how the database is going to work with the applications they're building. So someone in the ecosystem can really be building before we even think about purchase. And that, to me, was a radical departure for Oracle. I mean, obviously, Oracle in the Java world, there's some similarities here, but it's not so much just the fact that it's free, because we've seen free proprietary relational databases before, but the go-to-market and the approach. So that's why I think it's radical. How did you push that through, Gerald? How did that become a thing? Who did you have to persuade in order to make it so?
Yeah, well, it was certainly a journey, but basically everything what you've said is what we have seen as well, right? It's like the good old days where somebody would buy an Oracle database and then rolls it out through the company and says you have to use it, over. So we had to get it in the hands of the developers. And I think in general, to some extent, the move to cloud for Oracle itself has also kind of changed the way how we approach and see things as well. We kind of started this discussion, believe it or not, like pretty much in 2017. So there's certainly been a longer journey of two things, right? It's like one, as you said, we had like a free proprietary database or free Oracle database for quite a long time. But as you said before, it was this, functionality taken out, like this tiny set of database functionality. And that story in itself goes all the way back to, from what I could figure out, until 2004. But, we understood that in order for developers to be able to use the functionality of Oracle database, we have to make it as easy as possible for them to get it into their hands. And, we see more and more, or have seen more and more, that sometimes we go into our customers and say, hey, you have all this great functionality of Oracle, it's right there. And developers tell us, well, we're not even allowed to use it, or we have to go through a provisioning or procurement process internally, etc. And just as you've said before, it's like in the open source world, it's like, why are the developers new kingmakers? Because they don't have these shackles, if you like, on anymore. They can just use it, download it, right, and don't have to go through internal, external processes. So Yeah, it's like the conversation went all the way up, to be honest with you, right? It's like in the end, it had to be approved by Larry Ellison, but he was kind of on board the moment we explained to him why we're doing what we're doing, which happened just a bit, kind of late last year when we told him about this free and also releasing it to the developers first. I think that is also an important aspect of this that some have may missed or overlooked, right? It's like in the past, we also would kind of release Enterprise Edition first to our customers because, of course, our customers are important. Now we're putting it out first to the developers. And we think that this truly helps everybody because developers can start getting acquainted with the new functionality, with the new version of the database. And also what we have seen often in the past years is when customers upgrade to the next version, it takes them obviously quite a while to upgrade. And only when they have finished their upgrade, it starts sort of the demand for, this new functionality now that they're running on this new version. So by the time sometimes developers, or even frameworks, you mentioned Spring before, get demand for supporting new functionality of the new release, it's like we're years past when that release actually came out. There's literally frameworks still out there that cannot even support 12.1 functionality, which launched in 2013. So by turning this around, we're hoping that everybody benefits, including those customers when they upgrade, they have actually frameworks and applications ready to consume that new functionality, or at least, be kind of tested and ready to go with the new version of the Oracle database.
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. So, I guess one of the questions to my mind, obviously Oracle is known for its relational capabilities. That's absolutely where you came from. The game has changed a little bit in terms of expectations from a developer's perspective. What are some of the why might a non-Oracle developer be interested or excited by what you're bringing to market at this point?
Yeah, it's a great question, James. I think on the one hand, for non-Oracle developers that haven't used Oracle yet, it's like when you look historically, we're still the number one database and for quite a long time. So obviously there's some merit to that. Whatever Oracle offers in terms of functionality and features is something that enterprises still, after many, many years, are looking for to run their applications and mission critical workloads on, right? So I'm kind of get very passionate about that part, although don't want to get too much into it. But, it's like Oracle database is 40 years old, and yet it's still the number one database. It's like not a lot of software can actually say that, right? So even if you put it in Linux terms, Linux hasn't been a thing when Oracle database came around. But, like functionality-wise, I think, when you look at it, it's like Oracle has always gotten a very feature-rich or a rich feature set for developers to use. And as you said before, it's like we're known as the relational database, but actually we did object relational in the 90s, and we had XML in the database, and we have spatial in the database, and graph, etc. And we have JSON since almost 10 years as well in the database. So we have all these capabilities as well, particularly with, or specifically with 23C. One aspect that we're trying to change in the market in general is what we see this recurring cycle or loop from the relational to hierarchical data formats and back. So just mentioned, we had like object relational databases in the 90s, mid 90s. We had XML databases in the 2000s. We have document stores, IK, JSON databases since the late 2010s. And we see kind of this trend coming back a bit also to relational for good reasons of the relational model. But one thing in particular we've put in 23C is this JSON relational duality views, which on a very, very high level for a developer, you can see is like we put like the JSON to relational table mapping into the database. And while that sounds maybe in the beginning not so interesting, okay, it's just a mapping in a database, the real nice secret sauce to it is not necessarily the JSON generation out of relational that we could do since, ever since we put JSON into the database, the SQL standard has the functionality, but it's actually the high concurrent ACID guaranteed transactions or workloads that you have on top of that. So what I mean by that mouthful is basically it all becomes really interesting when you have like 200 different sessions, connections, applications coming in, trying to modify the same data, right? And this is like where, of course, in the NoSQL world, many people have kind of, quite frankly, omitted the problem by saying we have eventual consistency, it's not so important, applications can worry about this. But it's kind of actually it is important. It's like, and technically speaking, like any developer you ask if they could have ACID without the downsides of, the kind of latency aspects to it or the locking to it, they will probably want it because if I don't have any downsides, why wouldn't I want to have a mechanism to like say, okay, if I give up and roll back, everything will be undone for me. I don't have to take care of it. Or if my application for whatever reason fails over. So that was a long explanation, but certainly one of the marquee functionality we have is this JSON relational duality views. And people gotten really excited by this whole notion of a set as like putting the mapping in the database, or some people even saying, kind of putting a different style of ORM into the database, right? And being able to just define this declaratively in your database, and then many apps can use it with all the asset guarantees again that are on top of it or in place in the Oracle database. So to kind of get you the best of both worlds, it's like if you're a guy who develops an app that just wants to consume and send JSON data, it kind of nothing should change for you if you start using these JSON relational duality views. You just happen to consume and send JSON data, but you still have all the backings of the relational world. So for those guys who actually want that part of it, having the relational model or the data backed by the relational model, they no longer have to have this trade-off of having a hierarchical JSON data structure and having to fight with that.
Okay. So, I think that we, much as you've said, we've sort of seen these swings back and forth, and Oracle's had to kind of follow those swings. We made as an industry a lot of noise about, schema is bad. Let the developers not have to worry about a schema. But we certainly seem to be moving a bit more into an era where everybody's saying, actually, even if I just started with, pure JSON, wasn't thinking at all about the schema that I needed in order to building out over time, you begin to think, hang on a second, from a maintainability perspective, maybe that needs to change. And so I think that actually that's the question for me then. Do you see that duality view? Who do you see that as primarily valuable for? Is that the traditional relational person that is saying, oh, hang on a second, I've got these other sorts of objects that I'm handling. I'm looking at it from that perspective. Or is it that we've got somebody that's maybe a JavaScript developer, they're used to using JSON, suddenly they're like, okay, I'm happy to have this in a more managed fashion. So is this, do you think that helps you appeal to a new developer set, I guess, would be my question.
Yeah, we shall see as we progress, right? I think for the JavaScript JSON developer, technically speaking, nothing should change. I said before, Oracle has introduced native JSON support in 12.102 in 2013, and they could do exactly the same already since then, where they send in a JSON, retrieve some JSON. Where it becomes very, very interesting is this, as you approached on this schema sort of notion of schema, is when you look at this over time. And, one of the most interesting things I've ever found is like when I discovered why COD gave us the relational model, which kind of was to get us off ISAM, which no surprise was a hierarchical data format. Mm-hmm. So, and, it's like, what is the issue with that? It's like, so when you're a developer and you're building an app, a microservice, whatever, you kind of only concern yourself with, the concern of the app. Makes perfect sense. So for you, it's kind of quite easy to say, I need another sub object in there or another attribute in there, or even I call it attribute ABC, right? It's like everything of that logic is kind of put in your application. And certainly in the microservices world, we kind of have pushed a lot of this, like, your own microservice, your own set of concerns, your own database. But realistically speaking, you store data in databases because you want to hold on to that data. And, unless you have the very transient use cases, of course, that hang around. But traditionally speaking, or realistically speaking, really, if you put something in an enterprise database or into like your production database, it's usually because you want to hang on to the data. And I kind of have also always gone on quite along that is, and it's like applications come and go, data, stays around to persist forever if we actually could afford it, right?
What I said is that applications are like fish and data is like wine. Only one of them can get better with age.
Yes, that's a really, really good part. Yeah, and I have to remember that. I may use that if you don't mind. But yeah, exactly right. So it's like, the JSON schema, for example, itself is already a thing, right? So it's like JSON-schema.org.
Exactly.
It's like there's already a movement out there, right? So why is that? Well, because the moment somebody else wants to reuse the data, they have to kind of know what it is, right? And so it's, even if it's a separate application, that application has to know, okay, you introduce an attribute ABC, or you renamed it, or you removed it, right? And you kind of have to figure that out in your application. And that just causes overhead for the generic developer process or development process of that other application. And as you move on to this, right, it's like once you have this data stored and you come back to it 3, 4, 5 years later, and maybe the application is not even around anymore, right? But you just hang on to the data. It becomes really difficult to figure out, it's like, what did this data actually look like? And funnily enough, this is literally the opening kind of synopsis or abstract from Codd's paper when you read from the 70s. It's like future users of the data have to be abstracted from how the data is organized in the machine or something like that. And so this is where this relational model basically comes in again, right? The fact that we split it out to separate tables and say, hey, this is a customer table, this is the payment table, this is the delivery address table. And if you want any pieces of that information, you can just, query that table and you don't have to worry about it. And so coming back to your question, so, like for whom is this? So, what we're trying to do here is really to give you the best of both worlds. So for the JSON developer or JavaScript Mongo developer, however you want to see it, the benefit here is like practically nothing changes, right? JSON in, JSON out, great. Yet just another REST API somewhere or, database connection somewhere for your driver. The nice thing about the guys who care about the data is they don't have to make any trade-offs. They can stick to their relational model rather than having a lot of JSON there. And this is actually something that, it's like, to give you a real world example, many, many years ago, we introduced this functionality called JSON Data Guide, allowed you to actually get the structure of your JSON data. Literally why we did this is because a big financial services customer in France came to us and said, our regulators just said, we have to ensure that there's no credit card information, no credit card numbers specifically in the data. And we have 4 terabytes of JSON. And they kind of said, it's like, if you guys can help us, we use Oracle instead of the other product, which cannot help us. And so, this is the stuff you have to worry about, like many, many years after you stored the data, and where the relational model has always been very powerful. And that's why it's still around also, like since, for the last 40, 50 years. And so hopefully what we can achieve is really give everybody the best of both worlds. And that being said, is like, we're obviously not deprecating the pure relational storage and access mechanisms. We're also not deprecating the pure JSON native storage access mechanisms. So you can still use them as well, depending on your use case. But, it's like some people internally have called it like the peacemaker between the developers and the DBAs, this JSON relational duality feature to bring. But yeah, so we'll see. And certainly very, very exciting because the possibilities, to really give you both of that seem very high.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, that balance between control and productivity, I mean, that's what we're trying to do. I mean, look, it's there's actually a lot of database innovation going on in the market. It sort of almost surprises me how many new database companies there are, right? There's already successful platforms. We're clearly seeing a lot of packaging around Postgres. We've got some interesting innovation happening in around MySQL with things like PlanetScale. You've got new databases popping up all the time. And I think this is because of the issues you're talking about. The expectations around developer experience continue to grow, but it turns out that compliance and control continue to be important. There is a reason why we're having a relational database renaissance at the moment. That whole era of people aren't really talking about NoSQL anymore, right?
Anymore, yeah.
And we remember being quite surprised. Talking to financial services organizations, and they were using Mongo, and they're saying, well, it doesn't always matter if you lose a transaction. Jesus Christ. So anyway, yes, this appeal to both, I think, is going to be interesting. So I guess then, so from everything you said, what's your call to action then? The thing is free, so people don't have to ask for permission about it. Why would they gravitate to it? What have you got to tell a developer about why they should come and take a look, at this new release now?
Yeah, so although we make a lot of noise on JSON relational duality, there's like altogether over 100 new features and just for application development in this new release. And starting from JSON relational duality. We also introduced JSON schema actually for JSON native support. Again, something that was requested. JavaScript store procedures, domains from the pure SQL standard kind of point of view. Property graph queries, again, actually new functionality that's about to come to the SQL standard, which should be out shortly, sort of, but we kind of like, already stepped ahead because we worked in collaboration with the other standard members to standardize this and have put it in our product. So, call to action really is like, developers should obviously, download and get a hand on the new version for various reasons, right? Either to test out all the exciting new functionality that we've put in, or a subset of it. And it says like whether that's like new functionality that's coming into a SQL standard and you're kind of a SQL guy, you already have it in Oracle, or you want to give JSON relational duality a spin, or, you like the JSON schemas, or, JavaScript store procedures, which by the way is kind of like with an embedded GraalVM in the database. That's kind of really exciting as well. We've done that over the last couple of years. So we put GraalVM into the database. But also, it's like if not any of that, if you're kind of an application developer, framework developer, that's your chance now to download the new version of the Oracle database, maybe run your regression suite already against it. We know we have already 2 frameworks, very popular frameworks out there doing so, so that they get this head start. They actually came back and said, hey, fantastic, none of our tests seem to break. So we know already we're all good when this goes, prime time for customers as well. Just give it a spin, no strings attached, maybe learn a couple of database concepts as well along the way. Because as we know, also many popular Java people out there tell you is like, I think there's a quote around, people who use Hibernate should only use it if they know the database really, really well. If you don't know the database, you shouldn't be using Hibernate or something like that. So that's also, it's like one other use case or any of them, right? It's like you can, of course, download it, get going, check out new functionality, see what's in there, see whether your apps work, educate yourself, It's like, it's just out there, no strings attached. So that's one of the things, again, that makes me very proud and the team very proud that we've finally gotten to a way where, historically we know, right? It's like, why do people not use Oracle database? I think mostly it comes down to because they're too scared that Oracle will hunt them down and ask them for licensing, right? Or money or something. And like here we can truly say, look, guys, the reason why we call it Oracle database free is because it's free, right? And we will never ever come to you and ask you for money for this thing. Now, obviously, it's under this free use terms and conditions. So there's a license included with it. So, read through it. There's obviously, we also give you warranties with it, so AK support, right? But it's free. It's like when you download it, we will never ever come to you asking you for any money. And I think that's a very important step forward to get the developers out there, whether a new developer coming out of school or, a very seasoned developer, to actually give Oracle database a go and see why it still ranks number 1 across many of these rankings, right? And maybe see for yourself that it's like, hey, there's cool stuff in there that I can use to build my app or, to make my app even better.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Oracle database as a new Kingmakers case study. Who knew?
There we go. Yeah.
Okay. Great stuff. And on that happy note, thanks so much, Gerald. I think that's really interesting. Let's wrap it up. If anyone has any questions, Gerald is very accessible. We keen to answer them. He has to be accessible, not just the database. But any comments, put them below. Subscribe, share this video, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.